Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and welcome to day 3 of the Victober Poetry Challenge. So this isn't one of the official Victober challenges. This is just a challenge that I have set for myself, in which during my 14 days of self-isolation, I want to read one poem by 14 different Victorian poets, using the Victorian poetry anthology that I have here. So yesterday we had Alfred Lord Tennyson, and I described that poem as a treat. Well, today we have a treat again, but it's a very different kind of treat. So yesterday I said that I was going to try and do a new poem from each poet. Today our poet is Robert Browning, and I just don't have that option because his poems that are included in this book tend to be a little bit longer, and the only short poem that is included is one that I know relatively well, and I'm secretly delighted because it's a poem that I particularly like. It's just marvellously melodramatic and gothic, and it just spins a marvellous story, I think. And it is My Last Duchess. So I know this poem so well because it was included in the GCSE English Poetry Anthology back when I was at school. So I've known it well for about 10 years, and it's always a treat to go back to because I think I loved it so much as a teenager. It was my favourite out of that poetry collection because it's so gothic and so dark, and I secretly loved all that kind of thing. Even though I was quite it's not like I had dyed black hair and dark eyeliner and stuff, but this was the kind of thing that I thought was really kind of exciting and appealing. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we are going to try and discuss it. And if you have any thoughts about the poem, about the themes of the poem, about the language, about the rhyme, about the structure, just go ahead and make a comment and we can have a little chat about it. So, this is My Last Duchess, and it has the subtitle Ferrara. That's My Last Duchess, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you to sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of the earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts aside that curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as if they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first of you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only that called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrists too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce that faint half blush that dies around her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode around the terrace. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below, then, I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So it's a bit of a longer one already, you can see. I didn't read it very well because I kind of partially know it by heart, but not quite well enough. So I'm sorry for all the stumbling when I did have to go down and find my place on the page. So yeah, this is a fantastic story, I think. In the explanatory paragraph, I'm not going to read all of it because it's a little bit too long, but it just explains a little bit of the backstory behind the poem. So the proud speaker of the poem was probably modelled on Alfonso II, 5th Duke of Ferrara, a city in northeastern Italy, who married Lucrezia de Medici when she was 14. Poison was suspected in her death 3 years later. Browning imagines his duke entertaining an emissary from another court through whom a new marriage is being arranged. So there's this duke who is talking about his last duchess and kind of revealing the fact that he not only manipulated and tried to control her, but also eventually at least gave orders for her to be murdered at the same time as trying to arrange his next marriage to a close relative of the person that he's talking to, or a close connection. So this is a completely different style of poem to the last poems, although it does have some similarities of themes. So in the first poem we saw a silent woman being controlled by the people around her, and we've very much got that here. It's interesting how the woman doesn't speak at all, but she does develop her character. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And in the second poem, we had the theme of death and arrangements for death. So death is present in the story, and we also have this strong female character. But instead of it being like a sonnet or a more like a simple verse structure, the idea is it's like this dramatic monologue. So it's this one long speech by the murderer that somehow reveals his character. And it's interesting that you can't quite work out whether he is deliberately making a confession, whether he is aware of the way that he's incriminating himself, and whether perhaps he's doing that in quite a manipulative way, as in trying to lay the foundations of saying, you know, if my next duchess behaves in the same way, she will be treated in the same way, like trying to begin the process of controlling her before he's even married her, or whether it kind of guiltily slips out, and whether he just has this preoccupation with this idea of his last duchess and with the artwork about her, and just accidentally reveals himself to the listener and the reader. It's fascinating. I think it's really fun. In terms of theme, it's very, very gothic, like I said. It reminds me a lot more of something like Anne Radcliffe than it does of potentially other actually Victorian works of literature. I suppose in a way you could compare it to something like Wuthering Heights for the high drama and tension and the kind of like hatred and love combined thing. But yeah, to me it just really connects very well to Anne Radcliffe, particularly because of the Italy connection. And there's this thing where to English people, medieval Italy presented this kind of wild, exotic place that was still vaguely familiar but also completely lawless, according to their perception of it. Robert Browning's understanding of Italy was probably a little bit better because he did live there for a significant amount of time. He lived in Florence with his wife, who I should have said was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was the first poet that we met in this little poetry series. And on that video, Kay Howe commented that she didn't know anything about the pair of them as poets, but apparently Elizabeth Gaskell really hated Robert Browning because he once fell asleep while she was talking to him, which is exceptionally rude behaviour. So I have to wonder what the conversation was about and what the circumstances of that were, but I thought I would share that story a little bit more widely because that's a delightful little anecdote. Just going back to the poem, I wanted to talk a little bit about the character of the young bride, because it's clear that the speaker doesn't really value her as an individual. He seems to value the work of art that was created of her more than he valued her as a person, because he still kept it, he still is showing it to all of his guests. Like I said before, it's almost like a guilty preoccupation with him. Oh, I think I'm going to sneeze. No, we're good. But she in herself, he acknowledges certain features of her, but he doesn't really appreciate her as an individual. But she does come across as that individual to us, and I love how we can see her as this really like cheerful, enthusiastic teenage girl who does seem to be weirdly in love with her husband, despite him being this very bitter man, and you have to wonder whether how long were they married for? Like, it raises so many questions about their relationship, and how well did she know him, and because it seems like quite a distant relationship. Like, he talks about her smiling when he passed by, and the favours that he gives her, but it doesn't seem like they spent a huge amount of time together, I suppose. But yeah, the way that it seems like she had so much joy and so much zest for life, that she's loving the life of the young Duchess. She's enjoying getting her portrait taken. She's enjoying riding her mule around on the terrace. She's just really happy to be who she is. And there's almost something in it about the fear that the man has of a woman being so confident in herself and so happy and fulfilled in her life, that he feels that he has to try to contain that, but he doesn't. He makes this pretense of not wanting to stoop, but it's actually almost like he's unwilling to confront her because he doesn't know how that confrontation's going to go. And he makes this weird declaration that even had you skill in speech, which I have not, in the middle of this massive monologue using like very clear, precise, interesting and evocative language. Like, as a character, he obviously does have skill in speech, but he's willing to deny that and pretend that he doesn't have the skill to talk to her about it, and that's why he has to go in with his more malicious actions of, poisoning her to death, which seems like a proportional response to the situation. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. He's got the character. There's two characters in this. There's the character of the girl, which we've briefly spoken about, and the character of the murderer. And he reveals himself over the course of the poem to be somebody who is overly preoccupied with material goods. He speaks quite dismissively of the idea that somebody would bring his mistress in like a cherry bough, so presumably some fresh fruit or some beautiful flowers, but he is very precise in his talking about his possessions and his art, and he obviously views his wife as one of those possessions. So he talks about he says twice, the artist is Fra Pandolf, so obviously this is an invented name for the poem, it says, but just latching on to the prestige of that artist's name, also Klaus of Innsbruck, just depending on these little symbols of status. So you get the feeling that despite being quite domineering, he's also a little bit insecure, and quite manipulative, because he talks about the dowry that he's going to ask for, and he's like, Count's no munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry. So he's saying, I can ask for what I want in terms of money from the Count, because he'll give it to me. And yeah, he's kind of out for what he can get, and doesn't really care about the girl. He cares more about the dowry that she's going to bring with her. So I'm quite worried for this new young woman that he's going to be marrying. You could talk more about the structure of the poem and the rhyme. There is, although I read it in a way that I felt sounded more natural, there is quite a strict rhyme at the end of every line, which you obviously can't see when I do this. Call, hand, stand, said, read, countenance, glance, by, eye, durst, first, not, spot, perhaps, lapse, paint, faint, and so on and so forth. So he very strictly obeys to the rhyming structure, but it does flow quite naturally as a speech. So I feel like Robert Browning would have been good at writing like a play in kind of blank verse style, and that's probably what he was aiming for here. And because it has got that style, I didn't count the rhyme and meter, and I'm not going to do that now, but it does really invoke that feeling of a dramatic monologue, of an extract from a play, that kind of a big speech moment, and it does have an archaic feel to it, which fits with the medieval setting that he was trying to give the poem. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I'm not going to read it again because it is quite long, but I will put the text in the description if you wanted to read it and comment on any part of it. I would love that. I hope you're enjoying this, and I hope you're enjoying whatever you are doing for Victober, and I will speak to you soon. Take care.